You are listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast with Buck Joffrey. Get ready to change your life.
Welcome, everybody. This is Buck Joffrey with the Wealth Formula Podcast. And today I'd like to remind you that if you have time, visit wealthformula.com. There are tons of resources there for you. And it's also the place where you can sign up for our various products such as newsletters. If you want to sign up for Investor Club, which is for our accredited investors. It's also where you can potentially go to sign up for Wealth Formula Network, which is our insider community that has an opportunity to do a course with some very well-known figures in the personal finance space, along with an opportunity to join our online community of investors where we do bi-weekly Zoom video calls. We also have a Facebook group. Lots of fun, Wealth Formula Network. And if you want to go directly to that page, it's wealthformularoadmap.com. Now, as far as today's show, so I have titled it Charitable Giving for Profit and Gain. And if you listen to that, you should be thinking to yourself, well, that's a little weird. And it might be a little weird because if you are one of those people who is a true charitable type, you might be thinking that's kind of, I'm a little disgusted with this idea of charity for the purpose of profit and gain. Charity ought to be for your good deeds, right? For why adulterate the whole thing? And for you less charitable-minded, you hear charitable giving for profit and gain, you think, oh, good, I have a reason to actually listen to this show instead of skipping it. Well, it's good news because it's all true. And the truth is that charitable giving, money, is complicated. And for those of you who have done much of it already, you know there is an intangible benefit to it that you understand yourself. It's a little hard to explain, but you see several scientific studies and from major institutions like Harvard psychology department, etc., have shown that giving money to charity actually makes you a happier person. So in that regard, charity is not entirely just charitable, right? In exchange for a monetary gift, you are getting some kind of psychological gift in return. In fact, the one that everybody wants, which is to be happy. All I want to be is happy, right? Of course, giving can have a financial benefit as well. You get a tax deduction every time you give. And if you give enough, you can be, you could even drive yourself potentially down to a lower tax bracket. And the next thing you know, the giving comes out even, and now you really feel good, right? And that's the very basic charitable giving economic perspective. But obviously, there are a lot more levels of complexity used by the ultra-wealthy for tax and social benefits as well. You have already seen leveraged charitable giving in the form of conservation easements. You've heard about that through our friend Jim Sullivan. And although they are, conservation easement type charity is not without controversy, you see the likes of Ted Turner and Donald Trump utilizing them to their full extent because they can be also very profitable, or at least, mitigate significant amount of taxes because you're giving instead. A charity, as it turns out, has its own complexity when it comes to higher levels of personal finance, though. And you have probably heard of terms like charitable remainder trusts and other vehicles. And you are like, well, I don't know what that is, but you've heard it. And you've heard these vehicles are being used by the ultra-wealthy to legally avoid estate taxes. So it's out there. These strategies, though, as you might imagine, are complicated, and I can't say, frankly, that this is something that I consider myself well versed in. It's not an area that I think of myself as the way I am in, say, multifamily real estate or investing dynamics in general, that it's not my sweet spot. However, these strategies, the more you learn about them, you realize, man, that is really powerful. And in reality, they tend to apply to people who are, who have built up their net worth a little bit more, and might benefit from some of these things. But don't be surprised if you're one of those people pretty soon. I mean, listen, if you're investing in all the stuff we do in Investor Club, you have a good chance of really creating a lot of wealth for yourself. And not just through Investor Club, but, if you're doing the things that we talk about this show. Anyway, for that reason, I invited Jerry Barrowman on Wealth Formula Podcast this week. And Jerry's one of those guys who really understands the nuances of all this stuff, which is, frankly, I can say that, even people who deal with the ultra high net worth, 99% of those advisors out there have no idea what they're talking about when it comes to this kind of thing. And it's really, really interesting stuff. And you know what? It very well could apply to you. It could apply to you now, and it could very well apply to you 10, 15 years from now. So these are the kinds of things you want to plant in your head and put in your back pocket for when you need them. So when we come back, we're going to have Jerry Barrowman. And actually, we're going to have Rod Zabriskie from Wealth Formula Banking, too, because I needed an interpreter. So right after these messages. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Today, my guest on Wealth Formula Podcast, well, actually, I have two of them, but the primary guest that I have is Jerry Barrowman, who's a Director of Advanced Solutions at Cambridge Financial Advisors. He's a chartered life underwriter, chartered financial consultant. He's a chartered advisor, philanthropy, and life underwriter training council fellow. So in other words, he knows his way around financial and insurance products pretty darn well. In fact, there's probably not a whole lot that he doesn't know when it comes to charitable giving and strategies of enhancing estate planning. This is a complicated topic, and it was one that Christian Allen and Rod Zabriskie of Wealth Formula Banking, our partners over there, suggested that might be good for our audience. However, I have to say that there is some levels of complexity here that I think that I asked Rod to join us. So Rod Zabriskie is on too. Rod, if you would give us a sort of a little bit of a introduction to why you thought this would be a good conversation for our audience and the perspective that they should approach it.
Sure, and maybe I can start out by giving a little more of an intro for Jerry. So the kind of all the titles and all those kinds of things maybe speak for themselves, but for Christian and me, we've worked with Jerry for a long time. Christian maybe 13, 14 years, and for me it's been about 10 years. And Jerry's been a teacher and a mentor, really a go-to for advanced planning concepts. And one of the things that makes him what he is that I think of him like as a serial researcher, meaning that when he wants to dive in and understand something, he's amazing at doing that and just really getting into all the intricacies. And he's seen it from a lot of different angles, not just as an advisor helping individuals with their own estates, but he's been in-house at insurance companies, including New York Life, for years, and so he's seen it from many different angles and just so many different situations where it can apply. So really where this all came together, Buck, was not too long ago. We were talking about just the whole concept of estate planning and how charitable planning might fit into that. And immediately, Jerry's name came to mind because he has been our go-to when it comes to this type of planning and really helping people, whether it's primarily driven from a tax standpoint or whether they, really are, charitable oriented and they really want to build foundations or other things like that will really perpetually help, humanity. And so that's kind of how this all evolved and came to today.
Well, and there's obviously some profit and things like that as well that are financially beneficial from these things. But anyway, Jerry, kind of left you out of this. So first of all, welcome. Thanks for being on the show.
Glad to be here.
So let's start with this question. So why do families, with considerable wealth use charitable giving tools to reduce their estate tax?
So the estate tax applies to a very small segment of society now. About 1 out of every 1,000 estates will actually have to write a check. More would have to write the check if they did not use charitable giving tools. So one of the things that has been helpful to me in understanding charitable giving is the concept of social capital. And essentially what happens is the federal government has said people who achieve and accumulate great wealth have an obligation to contribute to society. I was at a meeting once where Bill Gates' father, Bill Gates Sr., spoke. He's an estate planning attorney in Seattle. And he said, we estimate that about 30 to 40% of the value of Microsoft is directly attributable to the fact that it was founded here in the United States, where we have effective infrastructure, where we have a community that's supportive of that. So we feel like we should give back. Well, Congress has said there's 2 ways that you can do that. Number one is you can pay an estate tax. Money goes to the federal government. It helps build all those infrastructure and other things that are helpful. The second is you can give money to charities of your choice. And for every dollar that goes to charity, we will reduce the estate tax by an equal dollar. So really the estate tax is a voluntary tax, something that you pay only if you choose to, because there are other ways to direct your money. I suppose one of the big questions is, what about the kids? I think we'll talk about that more later.
Well, it's funny. You're nice about it. I've heard other people call the estate tax the stupid tax too, because it's one of those things that if you plan ahead, it's not that difficult to avoid. And some people are thinking to themselves, well, gosh, this estate tax is really for the ultra high net worth. So we've got some limitations, and those are dropping. Can you just remind us what the estate tax would affect?
Yeah, sure. So right now there's an $11.5 million exemption per person. So you pay no estate tax unless your estate is greater than that at the time of your death. Means that a husband and a wife can be at about $23 million. That will hold until 2026, when the law that was passed by the Republicans 2 years ago sunsets, and will drop to 1/2 that amount, or about $11.5 million for a couple. I think it is important to say too, Buck, that charitable giving impacts both the estate tax, which falls on a small number of people, but it also affects income tax planning, which falls on almost all people.
Right.
And so these are tools that can be helpful regardless of your net worth.
Got it. So when you think about this, I guess from a financial perspective, beyond the social capital and the things that you talked about that obviously, people think about in terms of giving, but for the less charitable, don't charitable gifts reduce the amount of money available to family beneficiaries?
Yes, of course they do. Because if you give money to a charity, it's less money to go to your kids, except for this paradox. If by eliminating the estate tax or by substantially reducing your income tax, you can, by giving money to a charity, you can use that to purchase life insurance that is also tax-free to the kids. And in many cases, you can give more money to your kids income tax-free while giving money to charity instead of to the government. And for those people who think the 535 people in Congress are not as effective at directing social welfare as the charity of your choice, that's a good solution to increase the inheritance to the kids while decreasing taxes paid to the government.
So you said something I think that kind of perked me up and probably perked some others out there up. The idea of basically, using the life insurance as a way to create additional income. Rod, maybe this is a question for you. Is that one of the benefits of, say, banking? How would like wealth formula banking or some of the overfunded insurance policies fit into that concept? Can you kind of fill in that gap a little bit?
Well, as it relates to the fact that they are life insurance, then they can fit, right? So when Jerry refers to life insurance planning inside of this larger charitable planning, charitable giving concept, really it can come in a lot of different forms. And so depending on the situation and the individuals and what we're ultimately trying to accomplish, that will lead us toward what solution would make sense as far as the life insurance vehicle, how you fund it, and how it's used over time, whether it's while they're still living or ultimately, like he referred to a minute ago, when it's that income tax free passing along, and obviously if you do it right, then the estate tax free passing along the wealth to the kids.
Is there advantages of any advantages here that you actually have while you're living, if you do this kind of thing, or I mean outside of go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so there's advantages both while you're alive and while you're dead. When, of course, there's no advantages to the dead person, but to their family and to society there are.
Yeah.
By the way, we need to point out that the current estate tax law was passed primarily by a Republican-controlled Senate and House. If the Democrats were ever to take control of those again, you might see the estate tax limits drop. So good estate tax planning should be done all along the way, recognizing that there is change in Congress. Let's talk about the income tax consequences of giving. So, for example, I graduated from the American College of Financial Services in Philadelphia a number of years ago. That's where I got my master's degree in financial services. I had dinner with the president of the college one night, and I was talking about a presentation I'd taken on the road that shows the effective ways to use life insurance to maximize a charitable gift. And I'm not a person who's subject to the estate tax. And so as I'm talking this up, he says, well, Jerry, why don't you do that for us? And I said, why? He says, well, if this is such a great idea, why don't you donate a policy on your life to the American College? So I looked at it, and here's the way the math works out. And it's actually the opposite of the banking strategy, because we wanted to create a policy that has virtually no cash value, but a high death benefit relative to premiums paid. For a one-time payment of $15,000, I was able to create and fully fund a $100,000 policy that is owned by the school that I went to. I was able to deduct the $15,000, so my after-tax cost was about $10,000. So for 10 cents on the dollar, I was able to create a $100,000 endowment for a charity that means something to me. I believe in education and financial services. So that's a way that I was able to use an income tax deduction to create a benefit for an institution.
Well, and you were also able to leverage that, which is really interesting, because, I mean, even though you weren't able to take, $100,000 deduction, which would be ideal, right? You were able to create $100,000 of future giving, out of simply, effectively the tax equivalent of $10,000.
Exactly right. There's other tools. Let me go a little deep here with one tool that's kind of, suppose it's one of your listeners owns a business and it's highly appreciated. So they paid, let's imagine that it's a car dealership, and their basis in the car dealership is $500,000, and it's now worth $10 million. So they're going to sell this. They would owe tax on $9.5 million of capital gains. Potential tax is 20% federal. Here in Utah, where I live, 5% state, plus there's a 3.5% Obamacare surtax. So of the approximately $9.5 million, they're going to lose 28, one-third of that to taxes, roughly $3 million. If instead of that, Buck, they were to contribute the business first to a charitable remainder trust that they create, so they're the grantor of a trust, they contribute their business, they sell the business inside the trust, they owe zero capital gains, because the ultimate beneficiary of the sale proceeds will be either a single charity or multiple charities, may even be a foundation that they create in the name of their own family. So they just saved $3 million in taxes during their life. While the money sits in that trust, as long as the husband and wife are alive, they can take income from that trust for the rest of their lives. So instead of earning income on, and I know I'm doing a lot of math here and without the benefit of a whiteboard, but we started out at 10 million. We would have had 7 million if they had sold it and paid the tax. But instead of that, we have 10 million to invest. We've increased their income for the rest of their life by 30%. We've eliminated the estate tax. Now, what do we do about the kids? Well, it turns out that in addition to the sale of the asset without capital gains, they get an income tax deduction, depending on their age, of approximately $300,000. The income tax savings is going to come in at $100,000. With $100,000 in income tax savings, we could help them craft a life insurance policy owned outside their taxable estate to provide a tax-free benefit to their beneficiaries. So if you follow all of that, I have a business, I'm going to sell it. Normally I lose 30% to taxes. I lose nothing to taxes. Number two, I'll pay no estate tax on it. Number three, I'll have income on 10 million of principal instead of 7 million for the rest of our lives. And number four, I'll take care of my children using the income tax savings on that gift. You know, I said that wrong. The income tax savings would be deductions of approximately 3 million. So that would give us the money that we need to buy a life insurance policy. The kids would get 10, the charity would get 10, the family would live off of an extra 3 million of capital. We have saved income taxes and estate taxes, and everybody comes out ahead except the federal government.
Can you repeat the one part I didn't get there, and is how the kids still end up with money? Who the life insurance policy, is it on the business owner, or how does that work exactly? How are the kids still ending up with an inheritance at that point if the business was given away?
I would be very glad to restate that. So if mom and dad sell the business anyway, the kids are going to inherit cash, right?
Right.
Whatever mom and dad don't spend between the time they sell the business and when they die. And we know that it's down by 30% because of the taxes. Instead of that, they've contributed to the trust, they've sold it, they've paid zero capital gains, and they get a deduction of anywhere between 30 to 60% of the $10 million to apply against their income taxes for the next 6 years. Mm-hmm. So let's take a $3 million tax deduction. Every year for the next 6 years, they can write off up to 60% of their income. And it's that tax savings from those tax savings that we use to pay the premiums on a 6-pay life insurance policy. So they're just using income tax savings to buy a life insurance policy. It insures mom and dad. It's called a survivorship policy. And that would give us savings of about $150,000 a year times 6. We could easily buy on most people an $8 to $10 million policy that's fully paid up at the end of 6 years. It's owned by a trust for the benefit of the kids. It will mature at the death of the parents, income tax-free and estate tax-free. And that's how they get the money that they would have gotten had they waited for their parents after the sale of the business.
Does the business have to sell first in order for all this to be triggered?
No, actually, you don't want to sell the business before it happens. There's a very strict sequence of events that needs to be followed, which is why I will say this. You started out by saying this is sort of a complicated area of planning.
Yeah.
It really is. And so you need to follow a very specific procedure to do it. The first is you create the trust. You can have no signed paperwork that you're going to sell the business. The second is you transfer ownership of the business to the trust. Now, by the way, this is the one place in the tax code where the creator of the trust, called the grantor, can also be the trustee to manage the money once it's in the trust. So if I'm the guy who owns the business, today I operated as Jerry Borrowman, sole owner of the company. After the gift, I operated as Jerry Borrowman, trustee of the Gerald J. and Marcella Borrowman Charitable Remainder Trust. I then arrange for the sale after the trust has been created. But we don't want to push it off too far in the future because you really don't want to be operating a business. The intent is to sell it without capital gains. I negotiate the sale as trustee. I'm acting on behalf of myself and the future charitable beneficiaries. Could be a university, could be a church, could be a health care system. Any 501c3 charity is eligible. And I sell the business, file a tax return, I pay zero capital gains. So that's the sequence of events.
Got it. You mentioned a couple times charitable remainder trust. Can you define what that is for everyone, just for clarity?
Sure. So it turns out that the tax code does have a lot of definition around charitable giving because there's a potential for abuse. So there are a limited set of tools that are available, and most are called split interest gifts. So think about splitting something into two parts. In the case of a direct contribution to a charity, if I write a check to my church this year, I write the check, I get an immediate deduction. The charity has control of the money from that point forward. I have no retained interest in an immediate gift. In a split interest gift, the IRS says we're going to have two beneficiaries. One is a charity and one is the person who created the gift. So in the case of a charitable remainder trust, I've given the business away, I've sold it, I retain a life income from that business, either for myself or for my wife and myself. That's the split. I own the income from the trust for as long as I live. The charity gets the remainder. There's an exact opposite of that called a charitable lead trust. And by the way, the charitable lead trust is the nuclear option of estate planning. This is how you can eliminate the estate tax. You could have a $100 billion estate, and with the charitable lead trust, eliminate the estate tax completely. In that case, I create a trust and I provide income to the charity, that's the split, for a period of time, typically 10 to 15 years. At the end of that time, the remainder goes to my children, but free of estate tax. So this is a way, suppose I wanted to pass the business on to the kids instead of cash, I would use a charitable lead trust to accomplish that while eliminating the estate tax.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Got it. And then, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, actually. So, well, you talked about a direct gift. That's the alternative, right?
Right.
Let's talk about the risks in terms of, I mean, all of this, as we've talked about, is fairly complex, and I'm sure the government, the IRS, they probably don't like the fact that even though there's these laws and estate taxes, that there are ways to fairly easily circumvent them. So what are the risks when it comes to this kind of stuff?
So my belief is if you have very capable legal advice that's familiar with these tools, if you create a charitable lead trust, a charitable remainder trust, a donor advised fund, things that are very well defined in the code, the risk is very small. There's not going to be a tax court case named after you. What we do see in the planning community that I personally am opposed to is that people will try to come up with step transactions where I'm giving the money away, and yet through tax-free loans from the charity, I'm able to get the money back that I gift. And so I'm really tax laundering the money. I saw one recently where there were 4 steps. I give money to a charity. The charity creates an investment company and puts all of the money that I donate into that investment company. The investment company then loans me money tax-free. So if I gave $1 million, I get $1 million back as a loan. The investment grows over the years. When I die, we use life insurance to pay it off. But I really never parted with the property. Mm-hmm. And so the IRS would go after something like that pretty aggressively.
Sure.
So it's if you stick within the guidelines, there's very little risk. If you want to wander out and try to do something different, then there is substantial risk.
I want to focus a little bit on the idea, you said that that the family beneficiaries can really come out ahead. And going back to the idea that if you're giving something away, how can, your family be better off? Can you give us some actual, can you elaborate on that and maybe give us some examples?
Yeah, sure. So the one that we've already talked about is a charitable remainder trust. I've given my business away. I've sold it. The money's going to go to a charity. When I die, I use tax savings to buy a life insurance policy. Typically, you'll use a second-to-die policy where you're paying the least possible premium for the most death benefit because it's an inheritance replacement policy. But that's not the only way you can do it. In the case of a charitable lead trust, where I'm trying to transfer an appreciated asset to my kids at a discount, the problem is that if I die during the term of the lead while money's going to the charity, the full asset comes back into my estate. So we buy life insurance to pay the estate tax during that 10-year period of time where we're exposed to taxes. A third way that people can do it is you can use it to fund the trust once they're created. And then I gave you an example of an amplified gift to a charity, someone that I care about, using a one-time payment. You could do that with ongoing payments. And so these are some of the ways you can use it. The whole idea is, I've been in the life insurance business coming up on 42 years. And if you show people how a life insurance policy works and ask if they'd like that, they almost always say yes. When you ask people generally, do you like life insurance? They say no. And the reason, of course, is it's paying for the life insurance policy. Right. So we like what it does, but we don't like paying for it. What the charitable strategies do is help us find tax dollars to help buy the life insurance that is going to either help us during our life with cash values or help our family after we die.
So in a nutshell, what does this sort of all mean?
So think about this. My uncle, Merle Borrowman, was a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and then he became dean of the School of Education at Berkeley. When he died, a group of his former students put up money to create the Merle Borrowman Center at the University of Wisconsin because they admired him. So this gave him some kind of immortality. Using the tools that we've talked about, including life insurance, allows family to expand their reach in the community. So for example, one way that you can do that, Buck, is suppose that we are giving a large gift at my death to University of Utah, $1 million. We're going to put that in what's called a donor advised fund. The University of Utah will receive the funds, but they'll allow me to give my children to give advice on how to direct the money that's created every year on that. And they can give some to the university, but they can also give to the United Way of Salt Lake City. They can give to camps that help children with blindness, all sorts of things. Well, in each of those cases, the money's coming from our family to those charities. My children are going to sit on their boards because they'll be invited to that because of this substantial gift. And so the way a family builds influence in the community is by using these tools to amplify their personal connections, as well as do something that's very satisfying. So a lot of families will assign a grandchild or a child. They'll say, this year, the income from our trust is going to distribute $25,000. You get to be responsible for choosing a charity for $5,000 of that. Now you've got a child who is going out and searching out the charities and trying to figure out which ones matter. This becomes a great way to transfer values and ideals from one generation to the next.
Yeah.
So I hope what you're getting out of this is this. Charitable giving is good for charities. It's good for families. And it's not particularly good for the government, but they've said it's okay. They like charities too. And most importantly, it's a way to create values that become important to a family.
Got it. Rod, what do you, if anything, what would you like to add or, point out specific maybe to your experience with the kind of people we have as listeners?
Yeah, so maybe one thing I'll hit on first is that Jerry used a few examples of ways that we can fund these. Highly appreciated assets of all sorts can be used, right, Jerry? So you used an example of a business. What if it was a piece of real estate or stock or other things like that?
Yeah, so all kinds of things can be used to create these charitable gifts. The one caveat that I would say, because I just feel like I need to, you should never give a gift that is indebted, because that creates something called unrelated business taxable income, and it can make everything in the charity taxable. So the nature of the gifts have to be carefully considered. But you can give appreciated real estate, you can give an appreciated business, you can give an appreciated stock. Let's talk for a minute for the people who don't really want to create an ongoing legacy, but want to give a gift today. One strategy that can save people a great deal of income taxes right off the bat is this. Suppose that I want to give $20,000 to a charity this year, and I will get a deduction for that amount because it's under 60%. If I have some stock in my brokerage account that is appreciated in value, I can sign over $20,000 worth of the stock and get my same $20,000 deduction. But if I have a low basis in that stock, say $2,000, I escape paying capital gains tax on the appreciation. So these strategies work for everybody. It's just understanding what's available and how to use them in a specific situation. Got it.
Anything else from your side, Ron?
Maybe the last thing I'd say is just that based on the people that we've talked to and worked with thus far, we have a lot of people that I think are maybe not necessarily in that boat of especially at this point being above that $23 million mark, but are on the fast track to building wealth, and certainly by 2026, or like you said, maybe sooner if the Democrats take control and maybe some of those exclusions change, then they will be very quickly, I think, in a camp that it could matter. And so I think maybe some of the sequencing that Jerry talked about, if today it isn't a priority or at least a fit to start taking action immediately, at least understanding some of the pieces and needing to get them into place in the right sequence is critical, because if you're at the point where you want to sell your practice and you already have a buyer, then it's going to be too late to use some of those tools that Jerry's referring to. But if you know you want to sell and you're at the very front end of that and you get engaged in the process before you find a buyer, that alone can make all the difference in terms of the types of tools you can use.
Got it. Guys, I really do appreciate the time here. Obviously, most people who are listening already know Rod, probably through Wealth Formula Banking, and you can get in touch to Rod, by going to wealthformulabanking.com and see all the stuff we've done there. It's also Rod at wealthformulabanking.com. But also, Jerry, if people want to talk to you in more detail about these strategies, and I will say this, that I think when I think about when that estate tax splits, and knowing where a lot of our listeners are, especially in our investor group, if they're already at 4 or 5 million and they're in their 40s and 50s, you're going to get there pretty quick, especially with some of the things that we're doing on the investment side. And if they want to talk to you, Jerry, how do they get a hold of you?
So the way that I'd prefer is to go through Rod and Christian. I'm going to act as their backstop in this. So initiate the conversation with them. I'm happy to talk to people directly. I just like it to come by referral from Rod and Christian.
It also makes sense, honestly, just from the standpoint of understanding kind of what I like to have an interpreter sometimes in these types of things. And in fact, that's why I brought Rod on, because, you're trying to connect, where our current situation is, with our people, with some of the higher level stuff that you're doing. So that sounds great. So if you're interested in anything that Jerry talked about, we're obviously, the standard stuff with Rod and Christian and Wealth Formula Banking, reach out to Rod and Christian, or shoot me an email, buck@wealthformula.com, and I will connect you. Jerry, Rod, thanks again for being on Wealth Formula Podcast today.
Enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thanks, Buck.
We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show, everyone. Hope you enjoyed it. Jerry is a very knowledgeable guy, and it was great to have Rod Zabriskie from Wealth Formula Banking there as well. By the way, you should check out wealthformulabanking.com for these products that we call Wealth Formula Banking, Velocity Plus, And for you ultra high net worth types, we're something we call Velocity Plus Plus. Anyway, check those out. Go to wealthformulabanking.com. Check out those webinars. Very, very powerful techniques at the very least. Now, as far as the techniques that Jerry Barrowman's talking about there for people who are, probably a little bit more far along. But I want to emphasize, though, that don't be surprised. If you invest the right way, you can build up that net worth pretty darn fast. Let me give you an anecdote. I think this is absolutely fascinating. Okay, so there, as many of you know, we deal with a group. We partner with a company all the time. I won't name that company right now, but if you're in Investor Club, which you should sign up for if you're an accredited investor, you know who I'm talking about. But they have this incredible model. It's called the infinite returns model. And so what you do is you put money in, and every 18 months or so, you're getting refis of some kind. And then you re-put in your money, and the average annualized returns on the opportunities are like 30%, right? But that's not even return on capital, because in between these deals, you're getting refis and you're redeploying the same capital and recycling capital over and over and over again. So there was one person who was in every single one of these deals for the last 6 years. And during that time, deployed $750,000 of his own money, which, over 6 years, that's probably something that many of you can do. It's a little bit over $100,000 per year. So he goes minimum investment in every one of these deals. But because of that velocity, which I talk about ad nauseum, frankly, and hopefully you get it, wealth equals mass times velocity times leverage, right? And this guy puts in $750,000 during the course of six and a half years, and that $750,000 is now worth $4 million. Okay, that's true story. And that's not, of course, that doesn't mean that's going to happen to everybody. But the point is that if you follow the math and if you do it right, you can potentially really grow your money very, very quickly. You just look at this time of the year and you're like, man, I made this much money, but so much of it's going into taxes and stuff. It's really, really hard to save yourself into wealth. You got to invest. Anyway, that's it for me this week. I do want to invite those of you who are interested in taking it to the next level and joining us in our private network to Wealth Formula Network. Check that opportunity out, wealthformularoadmap.com. That's it for me this week on Wealth Formula Podcast. This is Buck Joffrey signing off.
Thank you for listening to the Wealth Formula Podcast. Visit us on the web at wealthformula.com. The information contained in this podcast are opinions, not fact. As always, consult your own financial team before making any investment. See you next time.